Hi, this is Georgia West with the Genealogy Queen, and I'm here to give you another update, a sneak peek on the 1950 census. One thing is that the National Archives is saying that they're going to release at 12:01 Eastern Time on April 1st, and that they should have their own AI index, and you should be able to search by at least 8 a.m. On their website, and so I'll put that link below so that you can see it. I also want to give a little bit of an update for the housing schedules and the information that I had on part one. It's really awesome when the community comes together and collaborates. And there was a couple of things on there that I just wanted to clarify and show by example of what you can do with the housing schedules. They did destroy the individual house filling out informations on those forms, and they did not scan the back of the schedules. However, they did compile all the information and give us some really interesting information. I'm going to use my dad's address again as an example. And if your ancestors or your family lived within 209 metropolitan areas around the United States, you actually will get statistical data right down to the block. And so that's why I'm going to use him, because he was in Chicago. And so what I did was I went to the census.gov website, and I'll put the link down below, into their library and publications for the 1950 census. And they have several there you can look through. Some of it, is kind of interesting anecdotal information. What I looked at was the Census of Housing, which is volume 5. Block statistics, and so that's where they take various publications. You can either look at the full report or you can look by the different cities, and they broke that down by block. And so then looking at the maps on the full report, I was able to figure out that he was, on Census Tract 834, block 26. And so as I went through and I looked at that, and was able to compare that to Google Maps and verify that that was where he was. It gave some interesting little information. There was 32 houses on that block at the time in 1950. It's about the same now. 29 of them were owner-occupied and 3 were rented. All of them were year-round homes, no vacation homes. All of them had running water, plumbing, all of that, and private bath, etc. There was approximately 2 to 3 people per house, and so that was typical. Obviously, it was my grandparents and my dad. And then it also shows the value of the home was, of the block of that area, the average was about $10,470 some. I'll put it up on the screen. But that was just kind of interesting because I looked at it and said, well, on the one hand, from 2022, we look at it like, well, of course they had indoor plumbing, and of course they had electricity, and then of course they had furnace heat and all that. But that was not the case in 1950, right? So there was a lot of areas, and we'll go into it a little bit more, where that was not the case at all. But in this case, where he lived, that was true. And the average home median value across the United States was $7,400 at the time. So you have to use that as the comparison. And so $10,470 some dollars is the average price here. So he was definitely in an upper middle class neighborhood. And doing really well. I was able to actually take Google Maps and look at a picture of it. And it's small by today's McMansion standards, right? But still very nice neighborhood, nice quality, nice home, brick house, little Cape Cod. And it was interesting because they had a summer home up in the area where I grew up. And that's how my parents met, in their summer home. And that they put additions on over time in the 1950s and early 60s. And that wound up being probably maybe 3 to 4 times the size of the house they lived in Chicago. And, you can see that the houses in Chicago are right up on each other, just a few feet in between each home. Even in the nicer neighborhoods, right? Land was at a premium, whereas their summer home, they were on about 2/3 of an acre of land. And so you could see especially being just south of the airport and, by the train yard and all that. It was probably pretty noisy. And so being up in their summer home where my grandparents wound up retiring was a lot quieter. and you can see where the appeal was at. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the Lake Geneva area, and you can see kind of the difference in the standard of living at that time. And Lake Geneva was known as kind of the playground of the Chicago wealthy, and so it certainly by no means was poor. However, it wasn't as built up in its infrastructure at that time. So we'll go ahead and take a look in just a second here. Okay, for those that were not part of those block statistics on the major metropolitan areas, there is still some really great information to look at. One thing that they did was they took the publications and they broke it down by state. And then as you're looking at those reports, what they did was they said, here are the towns or areas that are over 100,000 people or over 10,000 people, and then 2,500 to 10,000, and then 1,000 to 2,500. So depending on the population of the area that your ancestors or family grew up in, that would determine whether it was kind of singled out into its own column of information in the data. So I'm looking at the Wisconsin one and looking at table 23, which was talking about the plumbing facilities and that kind of thing. And so that was kind of interesting because they had like Geneva listed in that 2,500 to 10,000 range. It shows that there was 1,536 dwelling units that were reporting, and that's about right. What was interesting to me is that, the water supply, you assumed everyone had hot running water, but that was not true. It was about 1,200 of the houses, and then about 250 only had cold water pumping into the structure. And then there's, about 83 or so that either weren't reporting, had no water piping in, or there was a hand pump outside. And so that was within the city limits of Lake Geneva at the time. And then same thing with like toilet facilities. There's just a few, like 42 or so that said they have an outside outhouse. And then like another 78 or so said, there's either no toilet or wasn't reporting that. And usually they didn't report if they were, didn't want to say that they didn't have a bathroom. And so, so that was just kind of interesting. And then like heating equipment, 260 of them did not have warm air furnace or radiator heat, but had, basically a fireplace with the flue. And then there was like 20 that weren't heated at all. And again, for people that were living there year round in Wisconsin, in April when it was reported, that was, I just kind of had to take a stop and take a look at that and go, wow, that's pretty impressive, pretty hardy bunch. Heating fuel of those, again, most of them were coal. Only 200 had utility gas. And so coal was a big one, liquid fuel, wood burning, fireplaces, stove. 270 of those 1,200 were non-central heating. And so they had, just basically fireplaces. And so these are the year-round residents where I come from in Lake Geneva. It kind of shows you that about 50% at the time were summer homes of the Chicago wealthy and other people. And so they're not counting those because those aren't year-round and people weren't there at the time of the census. And so this is really for people who were actual year-round residents of Lake Geneva. It's still showing a substantial number of people that didn't have any real heat source other than their fireplace or a wood-burning stove to keep them warm in a Wisconsin winter where we know it can get 15 or 20 below with like negative 30 or 40 wind chills. So that's impressive to me. Obviously, they were starting to get utilities in there. Not everyone had them. They were doing the best they could. It also explains, even when I was growing up in the 70s, how a lot of the homes were still summer homes. And so there would be a big swell of people during the summertime. And then all of a sudden when school started, you'd see, it felt kind of like almost abandoned in the sense that, it was like every second or third house, it would be a summer home and would be closed up for the year. So this kind of shows in 1950 that it was even more so, right? And so obviously as people retired up there and their kids, decided to move up there, like my father, that became less and less. But again, it's just interesting information just to kind of get a feel for the area and for the town. It's not specific to the street or the house that, your specific family member or ancestor lived in, but it gives you just kind of an overall picture. And then I'm looking at water supply again, they out of the 19th. So now it kind of backs it up and I'm looking at Walworth County. So if I'm looking at Pell Lake or some of the more rural areas that didn't have 2,500 people living in it, a lot of the smaller communities, they were just kind of grouped together within the county, right? And so included in the county statistics are the larger towns as well as the smaller towns. So if you look at the county, though, out of 19,000 dwelling units that were reporting in, only 10,000 had hot water piped into the homes. Again, this is for people that are living year round. And so about just under 3,900 people had cold water only, and then there were several thousand that had no running water inside the house. So they were on a hand pump outside even in the winter. Flush toilets, 13,000 or so had them, and the rest didn't. They either had some form of shared facility, or they were outside in an outhouse, or dump it in buckets at that time. So it was really, again, this was not a poor area. This was middle class, middle America. And so that's what the conditions were in 1950 in the rural communities. And so it was just really interesting to see, again, the varyingness of that and why after World War II they had such an interest in this. And at first I honestly thought, well, why does the government care? And what does it really matter? But then when I start really looking at the statistics, it just gets really interesting to me, just to see what that is. So again, the links are going to be down below. You can take a look at the housing schedules. If you're one of those metropolitan areas, you can see it right down to the block that your family was on. If not, it can be within your town, village, or county is the largest segment of unit that it reports by, depending on where they were located. So I hope this was fun information. It's just kind of, again, and it's just sort of interesting to see as we prepare for Friday when the census comes out, just to get a little bit more context. And so I hope everyone's having a great time and enjoying the process, and we'll see you on Friday or Saturday with an update on the population schedule being released. So talk to you soon. Bye.